So today we will be on a mission Apollo, because we want to bring UI5 to the moon. This is our motto for today. And here I'm acting not as the chief architect of the UI5. Here I'm acting also as one of the developers, elaborating things and leveraging also technologies outside to bring it together with the UI5 stuff. So let me first go on our mission goal slide, because what we want to achieve today is, in the mission Apollo, we want to make it possible to use GraphQL in UI5. As next steps, we have some initial briefing for you to build a foundation, and then we take off. So fasten your seatbelts. We have only 20 minutes to go, and not more, to have some time for Q&A. When we look at GraphQL, what it is, I would say it's another query language, which comes with a different approach compared to maybe what we have in the OData world, how we do it there. So it's a front and first approach in our case. So we mainly build our application and then create the queries how we need it for our application. And this is also one of the trends what I see here in the GraphQL world. So the GraphQL stuff has really some nice advantages. So basically, it's built for special network scenarios where you have a low bandwidth or high latency, because what you can do is here you have the ability to create an object graph query to the backend, or write a query with an object graph to in detail express what you want to have. And if you look on the right-hand side here, it's not well visible, but it's taken from the GraphQL side itself, because it describes well how this looks like. On the first part, you see how this GraphQL data is being described. It's this is a type. The project type has a name and a tagline property, and it has also some users as contributors underneath. And then when you want to ask for only the tagline property of this project, you can do that with this object graph syntax. So you have this project name GraphQL, with that you are query for the GraphQL project. And then you say, I want to just have the tagline and not more. And this is then the result which comes back from GraphQL. So it is just the continuity. And this explains why it's really a cool thing for these special network scenarios. And it makes it possible to tailor at the end your query to your needs. With that, I will hand over to Damian. He will explain everything a bit more in detail.
Thank you, Peter, for that great overview about what GraphQL actually is. And I would really like to talk about some of the pros and the cons why you should use GraphQL for your UI5 application. And one of the major things I directly want to bring up is the whole UI5 GraphQL ecosystem. There's already a whole lot of frameworks available for Vue, React, Angular, and so on. And currently there is none for UI5. That's why we thought, okay, we should build our own. And then throughout the time, we built our own library to consume GraphQL, or utilize a library to consume GraphQL with UI5. We implemented it into our controller and mapped the responses of the GraphQL directly to the model. And we learned that it is much easier when the controller can directly decide what data it needs, and the Vue can directly load them without any additional hassle. And while we have built this, we thought, okay, maybe we want to also utilize the GraphQL subscription concept, which is already in place. So you do not have to figure around how to build your own WebSocket server and build your own eventing and how do you provide this to the client. This is already solved by GraphQL, and the native mechanisms already built in common libraries. So we could rely on this and directly react on specific events in our backend. The next point is really important also for the background we are coming from. And it is query cross systems, which enables you basically to build a middleware that will automatically resolve complex queries and can call simultaneously your legacy system and your microservice to collect the data in a single request. And while we now have built a complete backend where we can query multiple systems, we also created our single source of truth. With that, I mean, we have now one backend endpoint and one backend system that can be queried by our smartwatches, phones, clients, native clients, and web pages. And you can rely on all of these different types, rely on that you can only request what you actually need. So if your phone just wants a plain list, and then if you click on the item, you want a more complex data, that's possible. But you can also call with your desktop and directly query all the underlying resources and build a page directly with a single request. So this would be all possible then with GraphQL. But I would also like to talk about some of the cons, and these are here more in a comparison to RESTful applications, where with REST you have multiple resources and they will return different status codes. This is not the case with GraphQL. Most of the time you will only have a single GraphQL endpoint, and this will most of the time only return with a single status code. Therefore, caching is not that easy, as you cannot react on the typical mechanisms you're used to. You now have to rely on more fine-grained caching on field level and specific libraries that will do this on your client. And the next point with the rate limiting goes into the same direction. As you now cannot limit on resource anymore, you now have to come up with a more backend implemented approach. You can look at a guide available from GitHub where they showed how they implemented resource limitations. And the last point here about the query complexity is something that will come up as far as your GraphQL API will grow. As you now have to think about, okay, how do I handle my subscriptions? How do I handle my unions, which basically look like inheritance in GraphQL. And especially then the query design, how do you design your objects? Because it can get then to quite big requests in comparison to just request a single resource. But now I have to really design what data does my controller need and load it. And this is something you have to manage. But I think all these three cons are quite manageable. That's why I really would like to sum it up, that point. Yeah. And just talk about why I think you should really think twice, as RESTful application often comes with one URL per resource, and these often leads to inefficient waterfall requests to build your page. So you can imagine a shopping cart application, like the one we just saw, and it contains a lot of product IDs, for example. Now you have a shopping cart application or microservice and the product service, and the shopping cart returns a bunch of product IDs, and now you have to call each and every ID to build your page, or you even build a mashup service to combine this data to make the response even faster. But with GraphQL, this would be just done with a single call to your gateway, as you just tell the backend, I want this data and I want it in that way. And therefore, you can see modern web applications are not really designed anymore to work with REST endpoints, because they consume so many different resource types and different resources that you should really consider choosing GraphQL over REST for your next project if you do not need especially this capabilities that REST provides. And for us, we thought, okay, but how do we consume now GraphQL with UI5? And we thought, what would be the best possible solution for us, or the best possible client? And we thought the best way would be to go with the most adopted GraphQL client currently available in the open source space, which would be Apollo. And Apollo is not just a client for fetching data, it's more a whole ecosystem around the GraphQL stack. It provides you with a full-fledged Node.js GraphQL server backend and also a feature-rich GraphQL web client. They also provide native clients for iOS and Android, but we haven't looked into these. And in addition to that, you can build your own GraphQL gateway with the Apollo gateway stack. And here you can combine a database GraphQL provider, your REST API, your GraphQL microservice, or a legacy system all together into a single interface, and which you then can call with your application. The Apollo client on the website also eliminates one of the drawbacks by making it very easy to implement caching on the client side, which has its own reactivity in place, so it made Redux irrelevant for our use case. And the Apollo client provides, the Apollo community, provides multiple client libraries for better consumption for Vue.js, React, Angular, but there is a client for UI5 missing. So maybe Peter, can you show me what is the best possible way to integrate Apollo and GraphQL into UI5?
Yeah, so let me take over. So one of the biggest challenges what we had in the beginning is really to make it possible to consume, let me take over the keyboard and control the slides, to consume the UI5, the Apollo and GraphQL NPM packages in UI5. And this is, I think, also one of the biggest challenges when we come with every open source. So if you don't have a special bundle which converts it, this kind of modules into an AMD-like module or into an if a function, whatever, then it's hard to integrate that. And here we wanted to really make use of the tooling and of the tool chains which are available outside to have a simple way to come from the one hand side from these NPM packages back to the UI5 AMD-like modules. And for that, we set up a toolchain based on Rollup and Babel to consume Apollo ES6 stuff, ES6 modules, and to convert them in UI5 AMD-like modules. So let's look into that a bit more. And now I need to start the screen sharing because I want to show you our project. So it's time to take off now. So what we see here in this project is also, again, a monorepo. We have seen it quite often today, which consists of 3 parts. We have the Apollo server, we have the application, but I will, in my part, more or less concentrate here on this library. So in this library, it's a UI5 library project. It's built with the UI5 tooling. And in addition to the standard capabilities of this library, which is, put on a namespace of our Apollo client, I added some rollup configuration. Because what I want to do now is I want to get the NPM dependencies for GraphQL and Apollo here. You see them here. And I want to convert them into a UI5 AMD-like module. Therefore, I decided on a source file what kind of stuff or kind of modules I really need from all these dependencies, and make a general export for all of these modules, which I want to have later on in one module I create for UI5. So with Rollup, it's pretty easy to do all that. So I have here a configuration, and we will share that also later on the GitHub repository for that, how you can build out of this index.js file, what we have seen here, a UI5 AMD-like module, which can be seamlessly used in the UI5 side. And here, the trick is more or less that you have the format AMD, and instead of the notation define, it's a SAP UI define, which is being produced here. And when I run the build for that, I get in my third party, as an Apollo client third party folder, I find now the AMD-like module for UI5, and this one I can require later on in my client side. One additional thing I would like to mention here before I hand over back to Damian is that we implemented also, or tried to implement, a little base controller which provides some syntactic sugar when working with Apollo. And this is more or less really a proof of concept on how it could look like. It's not final, and we did not look into that in much detail, but we said, yeah, someone else will provide an Apollo client as part of the owner component, of the component which is the UI5 component at the end. And then we do some syntactic sugar that you have some shorthand functions to query or to mutate or whatever, do things here on the Apollo client. And then we have a model behind the scenes, the JSON model we used for our data of GraphQL to store that, to use data binding later on to connect UI5 views with that. And the last thing is that in all other frameworks, mainly they are using this Apollo root object to define all the queries and so on. So we also have that, and Damian had the idea to enhance the Apollo object with all the definition. We see that a bit later on, to have also invoke functions on them to easily call them without using maybe a more complex scenario to get that in. So with that, Damian, I would like to hand over to you, not to waste too much time. Now you are ready. This is how we made it possible to have the Apollo client. You need to unmute.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Maybe go over to the next slide already. Perfect. So I would now thank you, Peter, for showing how to implement the Apollo base controller and showing me how to import the Apollo client. So I will now try to implement the Apollo base client and the Apollo library with the server I provide here. And let me shortly get this out of the way. Perfect. So you can see here, we have the type to do defined with the ID, the title, and a completed flag. And we also have our to do query here, which will return an array of to-dos. So on the right-hand side, you can see our GraphQL Explorer where I can query this and see, okay, there are 2 to-dos available, and but why? And these are not showing up into my UI5 sample app. So, and how can I achieve this? This is the normal UI5 open UI5 sample application, but I removed the default model which would be normally in place here, and we wrote a little guide on how to implement the consumption of GraphQL in a few little steps. So I will open the steps here as they're fastly implemented and start by adding the GraphQL data source you just saw to our app here. And this would tell my component.js or my client initialization later on where to find the GraphQL server and make it configurable to change from where to connect and from where to load the connection. And this brings me directly to the next place. I have to initialize the client. The next part is then importing the library Peter just provided. So, oops. I will need this third-party library and import it here. Now with the constructor pattern, I can import my Apollo client, the in-memory cache, and the HTTP link. And all what I'm doing here, also now the initialization of the client, is something which will be done by all the projects like Vue and React and Angular, because when providing the HTTP link or the cache, you can do multiple different things. You can change the HTTP link to also support WebSockets, provide a retry link that will automatically retry failed request. But in this case, we decided to really show a very simple example, having a normal link pointing to our data source, and sadly have to disable the in-memory cache, as we're currently relying solely on the UI5 JSON model and writing directly to it from the GraphQL response. In future, we hope to combine these and can directly rely on the reactivity of the in-memory cache. So as a next point, I will go to the controller, and in this controller, I will now have to add again, oops, sorry, I'm not fiddling around too fast. I will have to again add the library bundle and the Apollo base controller. And from the library, I simply only need the GQL library itself. Again, with the constructor pattern, because the GQL library will enable me to write GraphQL queries directly inside my JavaScript. And the Apollo base controller will add the syntactic trigger I want to have in my controller to directly just initialize the root object. I have to initialize this object in the onInit function. And that was basically all to enable my whole OpenUI5 sample application consume and do GraphQL calls to existing server. And here you can directly see I'm now simply importing the root object here, which is now consisting of a to-dos object. And this would per default already tell my default view or my default model that the response coming from the query here defined will be mapped to the to-dos, to the /todos model. And so the default model with the path /todos. But we also wanted to show you here the possibility that you can optionally add your own binding syntax here, which is following the standards of UI5 on how to define a binding, and can bind it to a different model if you like to. And then simply here, the definition of the query I already showed. And to prove that this is everything you have to do, I will open the app again, reload. And if I did nothing wrong, you should already see perfect. Here are the 2 responses I was showing you in the playground. But the thing is, here's already the thing which is missing here is we do not have the mutations or the subscriptions in place. So I will simply swipe over to a more complex example, which already had the subscriptions in place and the mutations are already in place, just to show you quickly, as our time is running up, that I can add here ifcon is cool, and it will be added to both instances. And the whole source code on how to do this is also available. Every event I'm doing here will be translated to an event that will then send by the backend as a subscription to both clients, and the client will then do a live reload of the data. So you get reactivity directly. And I want to briefly go over the controller of that to-do app that is a bit more complex. to just show you how this is looking, and then Peter will do a summary. So you can see we have our GQL definition up here. Also, all our subscriptions are defined here. Then again, the Apollo root control object to define what is the data I need. And then below, you find the reactivity on the subscriptions. And again, then for every mutation, there's also here then how to use the mutation in combination with getting an input model and something like this. And that's basically all from this demonstration. Peter will now take over for our summary.
Okay, thank you, Damian, for all the details here. As said, we will also publish this source code on GitHub soon. Then you can also take a look into that, and let's do some mission debriefing. So we accomplished our mission. We made it possible to use UI5 together with GraphQL, and also finally the subscriptions, which made it really smooth at the end when you have these applications running there. We had some learnings, and one important learning is for me how to wrap npm packages for UI5, because this cannot be only applied just for this Apollo. It's a general, let's say, boilerplate, general template, which could be applied to any other npm package here. We learned some pros and cons of GraphQL, and also we showcased an example how it could be used here. That's maybe not the best of breed, and there might be still some work to do there, but it's I think a starting point to think of that, and let's see whether more ideas we will raise out of that. And yeah, there are some limitations in. We will try to tackle that with caching and so on, but I think overall that's a very nice starting point for all of us to also look into that a little bit later on. And with that, I think we are done, and I would like to thank you.
Thank you, Peter and Damian, and thank you for that really nice talk. We have a question to you in the questions pod, and that is GraphQL capable of also supporting stateful requests for data locking mechanisms in the backend, maybe similar to soft states in the OData services?
That's a good question. Damian, maybe you as the more expert might be.
I think in this point, it's really up to you and your implementation. GraphQL gives you a very open way of implementing your own resolvers. And if you like to have something like locking mechanisms on your database, I think it's really then up to the database you're using. So I cannot simply answer this with a yes or no.
Yeah, it's maybe also one point. So if you look into that code base later on, you have this server implementation here and this middleware layer. And in this middleware layer, you have you have opportunities to write your own code, do maybe also this locking on your own. I'm not aware of whether the Apollo client has also some capabilities to do that. That may be also interesting to research a bit more in detail. That's that deep, I think we are not yet in.
All right. So maybe an easier question. When will this project be publicly available?
Soon. I think it's still private because I see also this is a kind of a next question, but we will make it public directly after the cleanup today, or let's say a Monday latest. You should see that.
Great. So the question, is this a private repository? UI5 sample Apollo kind of answered already, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So we made it private to have the surprise today.